And I'd like to welcome you all to Book Talk at Clarion. And our guest today is Bobby Coleman. Bobby is the managing editor of Jambu Press, and it is a collective of San Francisco poets, editors, and activists devoted to poetry as a positive path to social change. We're honored to have Bobby here today to talk about the imminent release of Light on the Walls of Life, a tribute anthology to Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And also with us today is Virginia Barrett, who is the guest editor. So I want to welcome both of you to today's book talk.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thank you. Now, we didn't plan this, but I found something on YouTube that I want to share with everyone. And I thought we would start out with a video of Ferlinghetti reading one of his poems, if that's okay with you.
Wonderful.
Okay.
The world is a beautiful place to be born into if you don't mind happiness not always being so very much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything is fine, because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time. The world is a beautiful place to be born into if you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Oh, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't much mind a few dead minds in the higher places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or such other improprieties as our name brand societies prey to, with its men of distinction and its men of extinction, and its priests and other patrolmen, and its various segregations and congressional investigations, and other constipations that our fool flesh is heir to. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of such things as making the fun scene and making the love scene and making the sad scene and singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes, but then, right in the middle of it, comes the smiling mortician.
Bravo. Oh, yeah. Boy,
Just sort of put everything into perspective, doesn't it?
there's so much to say about that video. Let me start by
Yes.
pointing out those glowing eyes. Many, many, many people who met Lawrence and loved him spoke about those eyes, and they really had that color, that radiance. I've met very few people in my life who've had that kind of blue. Um, Agneta Falk, for example, wrote a tribute poem to Lawrence, mentioning his eyes. I did also, and you could see that. It doesn't really come out too much on the video, but in person, boy, that was really something. Like the sea and the sky all mixed up in one. Also, he mentioned the traffic as he was about to read, and he famously did not like urban car traffic. He preferred plazas and car-free alleys, and what we're now looking at, slow streets, which we're trying to make permanent in San Francisco. And he called it Autogeddon, as in Armageddon. He thought that the inundation of gas belching cars and diesel and all this stuff was just paving over the planet and ruining the quality of life that he would have preferred. And that poem that he read, which is, of course, one of his early poems from A Coney Island of the Mind, one of the best-selling, one of the best-regarded books of American poetry in all history. Um, I mean, one might even compare it to Leaves of Grass in its stature and impact from Whitman. Um, he he still has a youthful demeanor, despite the fact that decades had passed between the time of his writing that poem and reading it in that way of a great performance poet, not just a publishing poet. It comes off the page as a performance, and his lilt and his rhythms were sort of part of the scene of the San Francisco Renaissance that was in effect at the time that he emerged in San Francisco. So that the style of reading is so uh, typical of Lawrence, and you know, many people have fun sort of emulating it in conversation. Oh yes, and then this and then that. You know, the style that he's got that just comes like waves of the sea is very idiosyncratic and yet somewhat typical of the way that poetry was recited at the time that he emerged, but still his own style, and that that immediacy, that realism that connects with everyday life. That's so much a hallmark of Lawrence's qualities.
Yes. And Bobby, let's talk a little bit about the anthology that is coming out. How is last time I talked to you, you said that it is going to the printer.
Well, let's give a little history on this.
Okay. We'll start at the
I
beginning.
think it was a couple of years ago, around
All right.
2019, just before Lawrence turned 100. He's 99 years old at the time.
Yes. But you
And
know what? I have all your dates because
you have
I
all
have
the
all your
dates.
dates because I don't erase my emails.
Oh, well,
So April 19 was the day I received a call to submission from
well,
General
prior
Press.
to that, Lawrence had had given his personal blessings to a tribute anthology. Virginia had written to Lawrence because Lawrence had been a contributor to two prior Jambu Press anthologies. Um, and he trusted us that we would, you know, put something together that wouldn't embarrass him and that would reflect his political points of view and the kind of quality that he was a stickler for. So we were very pleased, very pleased to do a centenary tribute anthology of poetry and, you know, graphics and associated materials that would reflect Lawrence's spirit and stimulate poets to be more creative in response and play with Lawrence's oeuvre, his style. So that happened, and then there was COVID, and then we were pushing it for Lawrence's birthday, and just days before sending it to print, Lawrence passed on, and so we started to retool, and of course, that gave the opportunity for making a more lasting tribute to Lawrence rather than something for his 100th, which allowed contributors also, we had to make sure that each contributor's submission, their poems now came in a different context. So, in addition to the graphics being part of the context of the poem and the book as an entirety, we wanted to make sure that each contributor wasn't sort of caught with a picture from before when he was still with us. And so now the book is more complete because the contributors have also been able to sort of supply materials. We've been able to find some things that now contextualize what was already there. And so we're again just really hoping to get the book in people's hands in a matter of weeks. Um, so that's it's been a long but beautiful experience. Often bringing tears to my eyes because of the expansiveness of Lawrence's vision and the way that the writers um, sort of came into the scene in response. So when you have a transcendent catalyst, and then you see the way the creative people respond with their own sense, their own take on that transcendence, you end up with something so beautiful that it's achingly gorgeous. So it's been a responsibility, but it's also been a real pleasure to be the the trusted editor of this work.
Can you talk a little bit about the contributors? Are they mostly local poets, or are they from other parts of the country, in the world? Who are the contributors?
Well, again, this kind of the responsibility was always to reflect Lawrence's vision and to try to do something that honored his work and his persona in the right way. So one of the things that Lawrence always seemed focused on, in addition to the work we had done with him previously, was youth voices and voices that were supportive of inclusion, a universal perspective. And so those voices are from all over. There are a lot of people that knew us and were eager to participate because they, like you, Clara, you had been a participant in some earlier projects that we had done, 2 prior anthologies. So, but the call for submissions went all over. I mean, that went international. So we put the word out that Lawrence had given his blessing to this anthology, and we sought contributors from all over, young, old, um, and culturally diverse. So I'm proud of that aspect of it. We really did try to be as universal as Lawrence's perspective.
How many contributors altogether?
There are at least 60. There's over 60, and there are of course graphics contributors also. And to be honest, it could have been twice as many. When Lawrence passed on, there were a lot of folks who wanted to jump in, which was kind of impossible to handle that way. If there's another volume, if there's something in the future, things that can go on the website, more participation would be great. So I'm all for that, especially since Lawrence's intention for this project was that it would encourage youth poetry. And of course, all proceeds will go to the support of youth poetry programs, and those will be announced on the website.
That's fantastic. Virginia,
Unmute myself.
hi. Yes,
Hi,
please
Clara.
Hi, I haven't seen you for so long.
I know, I think the last time was when I put an installation at Clarion.
At Clarion for our grand reopening. And since then, we have 2 more grand reopenings.
Can I jump in and say how excited I am that we're doing this recording and this Zoom broadcast immediately preceding your reopening? And I'm really thrilled to hear about your plans for that, and congratulations.
Thank you. Well, we hope to keep us open this time, with God's help, that we will be opening just one Saturday, every Saturday. We don't know what else to do besides that at this point. We just have to wait and see.
I wanted to say that the scene that Lawrence was a part of and that he sort of inherited from Kenneth Rexroth and then continued it in his own way around City Lights and all the people that he knew was not that different from the scene that you're a part of there at Clarion. The mix that you're trying to create, art, music, theater, poetry, this was very similar to Lawrence's vision of how the arts would come together and people would come together.
Yeah. I think he actually was at Clarion at one time, but I didn't meet him. I heard it from somebody. But Virginia, tell us where you are and your part in this anthology.
I'm in San Francisco.
You
So
are?
not far. Yeah, I've been out of San Francisco, but I'm back now.
Oh, wow. I didn't
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
We're all over the place.
Well, I know I've been all over the place, but I did come back, and then COVID's kind of put everything. I'm not out and about,
Right,
to say
right.
the least. But yes, I am here in San Francisco. Last time I spoke, emailed, I was in Taos, New Mexico, I believe. So,
Yes, yes.
but yes, as Bobby said, my involvement with the project started when Ferlinghetti turned 100. I woke up one morning and said, "There's got to be an anthology," which is what happened with Jammu Press put out a Occupy anthology. Same thing happened. They're similar. I was camping somewhere and I realized that there were lots of people in tents, but in urban areas and for a whole different reason. And I thought there's got to be an anthology about the Occupy in San Francisco. So it's just, it's like I wake up and these ideas jump into my head. And then, of course, years roll by because it takes a long time to put anthologies together. There's a lot of stray cats to to get together, writing to all the artists, getting the word out, getting all the information from poets and artists. And so that was my initial part of the book. And then I've been behind the scenes just with design and just keeping the ball rolling.
Right, right. Yeah. So I know that graphics and photographs were not part of the anthology originally, because I received another email a year ago asking for submission of photographs and graphics.
It would have been initially in the submission request, but probably 2 years ago is too long ago for me to remember. Maybe Bobby remembers, but initially perhaps the emails were separate to poets and artists, but the submittable, our submittable submission request was open to graphics, to art, photography, and the submittable went out, I think, a year after the original submission time, which is what helped, as Bobby was saying, reach an even broader range of people. And I will say, in regards to contributors, we definitely were capturing Lawrence's two sides of the United States, because as far as percentage wise goes, we got a lot of submissions from New York City, mostly New York, which is his roots. And then of course, the San Francisco area, and then anywhere in between. But the anchors, which was really interesting, the call went out and the people in New York were like, yes, and people in San Francisco area. So he's got those two places captured. People's hearts are captured there, definitely.
Yes, that's wonderful. Now
I would add that graphics were part of the original call for submissions, but
okay, I just didn't know about
we
it.
highlighted it with greater focus, greater strength on the second round as we swung back into action.
Right, right. I picked out some photos of Lawrence, and maybe I would share it right now.
I love that photo.
So I look at this one and I thought, before COVID, this was what we did when we went into somewhere, a hole in the wall or something. We sat down on a stool and we started to read, and it's so timeless, because we were still doing it. Although now the format is very different, but I think that after the pandemic, we'll be doing the same thing. That's not going to change too much.
Well, there's a few things to say about this one. First of all, he looks so so youthful despite the balding. Look at the face is so boyish. I can't really tell how old he is there, but it appears that he's on a stage. And he was those readings were often at art galleries, sometimes in theaters. The history of performance poetry in San Francisco is fascinating. There was such a scene here for each decade had major events and lots of participation, lots of involvement across fertilization with theater and music and publishing and journalism, activism. And so here he is on stage in sort of the middle of the storm and yet looking peaceful, like a sailor on a ship that's about to sail across the ocean. The other thing is his casual clothing. So, he was um, usually fairly well put together, sport jackets and mercantile in appearance. His demeanor was, he was going to work. He was not a sloppy guy. He wasn't that kind of a bohemian poet.
Right, right.
He had his act together.
He
Uh,
didn't want to be labeled as a beat poet.
oh no, but here he is
He's
in
a
in
physicist.
casual garb. So a man of the people, to be sure.
Yes. So this one is reading with a jazz band.
Yeah.
I have
So
a funny comment, if I can just interject with, I remember reading somewhere that Lawrence said, the reading with the jazz, it didn't work out all the time. He said it was a great idea, but sometimes that really caught my attention because I was like, really? I thought that was the whole scene.
Well, remember that Lawrence, a meticulous publisher, editor, and writer, right? So his words are so gorgeous, but he's not he's an ecstatic, but he's not making it up as he goes. He's not a spontaneous performance poet. I can think of, you know, Anne Waldman comes to mind, Amiri Baraka, other poets who are musicians. Lawrence is a painter and a poet, you know. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure he had his humor and spontaneity, but not like a jazz musician who's making the motif and crafting it in space and time, you know. So I could see him saying that.
Okay, so I have questions about this photo. I think it's a great photo because a lot of the you could see the beat poets were here. But who is this person that is on that gurney? Do anybody recognize that person?
Yes, that's Andrew Hoyam.
Oh,
It's Andrew Hoyam.
Thanks, Nancy.
Jane, do you know what happened to him?
It was just kind of a stunt that he told me about it. It's so funny. We used to be friends back in the 60s, a long time ago, but that's who that is.
So he wasn't really hurt or anything?
No, it was just
it's just for show.
yes.
It kind of looked like a stunt. I was guessing it was a stunt because of the big
Yeah.
smile on his face, and
Yeah.
they got the gurney in the photo, and
Yeah.
it looks like a surrealistic kind of goof.
Yeah.
Where did they get the gurney? That's what I'd like to know.
I don't know.
And,
I don't know.
well, you can fool me. You can put anything in front of me and I'll believe it. But, Lawrence also looked a little bit out of character here. He's in the, you see, this is him, right?
Yep. Well, it's in a way typical. I mean, he's so emotive there, and I could see you saying out of character, but there is something about Lawrence's theatricality. He really had, I think he wrote some things for film. He had a fair measure of theatricality. In fact, one of the things that he and I shared personally was his appreciation of the some of the performance things that I did when I was first meeting him were kind of hammy. Like I did a theatrical enactment of one of Philip Lamantia's poems, and uh, he liked that, and he wore masks sometimes to make his points on stage. You know, literally would put a mask on or a Statue of Liberty crown. So he had a sense of theater, and he could be animated uh, when it was called for. It's interesting to me that central to the photo is Allen Ginsberg. My understanding is that Allen Ginsberg would actually stay with Shig Marau at his apartment when he came to San Francisco from New York. And so there's Allen right in the center. Michael McClure, who recently passed, is to Allen's left. And Jane and Nancy can name all the cast of characters. I'm sure there's a famous photo.
Well, Shig is sitting down in front. It's the only Asian guy there.
Yeah,
Oh, the one right here.
and that's your
Yes.
uncle, and that's your uncle,
That-
Nancy, right?
That's my uncle, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Also, Ferlinghetti wrote plays. There's early plays of his. I recently came across a collection of one-act plays, and they're super experimental. And I believe he wrote them when he was in New York still. So he isn't, that far from doing theatrical things like Bobby was saying, wearing masks. And the plays are super far out. They're- Yeah, they have them at the library here, so you can check them out.
His
That's
his
interesting.
connections with realism and surrealism kind of go back and forth, and he translated poems from Jacques Prévert for the adult poems for children anthology that Jambu Press did, and Prévert was pretty famous for screenwriting Children of Paradise and other Marcel Carné films in the 40s. So so Ferlinghetti was an admirer of many great surrealists and theatrical people. I think when as this young man, he came and was particularly impressed by the politicos and wild characters that he met at Rex Roth's weekly gatherings.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the famous poem. A famous poem, the famous photo.
Right.
Would you say that he was famous because of how? Because of the trial?
I think that this was not the kind of fame he was looking for, but it came to him. I mean, the San Francisco police were looking to bust things for rather oppressive purposes. There was so much that was mildly subversive in the scene then that they wanted to keep down, and so they went overboard. They did it to Lenny Bruce, and here they did it with one of America's great poems. So most of us know the story that in 1955, in October 7th, 1955, there was a reading at the Sixth Gallery on Fillmore Street. Lawrence was there and heard Ginsberg and requested the submission, published the book, and Nancy's uncle Shig and Lawrence were busted and arrested and tried for selling obscene materials.
They actually read it, the police.
I don't think they read much because it's funny. Lenny Bruce, Lenny Bruce, the performance artist, stand-up comedian, who happens to be from my hometown. He it became a performance piece for him that the judge clearly never read his work. They never understood it. They weren't in attendance. They didn't understand the context of any of it. So they got legal representation and they won this high profile trial, and it was a landmark trial for freedom of speech. I think that for somebody like Lawrence, if you understand how shy he was on the inside, that he would push himself out to do audacious things in public, but he actually was pretty pretty shy in private. Um, that for him to be thrust into the limelight, I mean, look at his eyes there. They're almost dismayed. He actually had the courage of principle over and over and over again, the courage of principle. So he would stick his neck out, and he found himself in the middle of this controversy.
Yes. Yeah.
But he believed in the work, and he believed in the power of poetry very clearly, that he believed he was doing the right thing, and that he also had a sense of being an American poet and publisher and painter, and as an internationalist, but also as an American, he believed that he would prevail.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So,
the word insurgent comes up a lot in Lawrence's work.
so what does it mean by insurgent art?
Well, I would say by that he means non-complacent, transcendent, resistant to an offensive status quo, and that he was influenced in part by Eastern philosophies, particularly Buddhism. And I think that there's a sense of kinesis, of change, of something more important than false authorities. Um, he had both anarchist and socialist political leanings, and I believe that they were extremely important to him and not just for show. I would see him with quietly holding signs and going in and out of the store and going to mobilizations and actions and truly believing that power belonged to the people and needed to be deployed for a better world, but that poetry had the special character of getting at the heart of the matter, that the poetry had a power that was bigger than a mayor, bigger than a judge, and bigger than any authority at any particular time, that it was universal and connected to higher values. And he wrote about it as a universalist over and over and over again, that poetry was a vehicle for for the kinds of aspirational things that we aim at.
Okay. So I put this slide in because I want to talk about my contribution to the anthology.
Great.
And it was inspired by this particular poem, Moscow in the Wilderness, Segovia in the Snow. And I hadn't read a whole lot about Lawrence's poems, but I heard about this poem through Jack Foley. And Jack is also, he also plays the guitar, and he was telling me about this classical Spanish guitarist,
Andres Segovia.
Andres Segovia Torres. And he said, by the way, Lawrence Ferlinghetti has a poem about this. So I went on to YouTube, I found it, and I totally understand Virginia when he said that sometimes playing with music works, sometimes it doesn't work. In this particular case, it worked beautifully. I don't know who plays the guitar. I don't have the original recording. And on YouTube, it didn't give credit to the musicians. So I have no idea who was playing in the background, but it was beautifully done. And I encourage everybody to go to YouTube and look it up and listen to it. Immediately when I listened to the recording, what was in my mind? He talked about a bus, getting off the airport, getting into the bus at night, going down the street of Moscow. And immediately that bus came to my mind, the number 14 bus, the Hayes bus that goes down to Sacred Grounds Cafe where we do the readings. And I used to ride that bus, going there, and then a lot of times when we leave, a bunch of us would get on the bus and leave. And then we will go through the dark streets and we'll go through the different neighborhoods, going down to downtown. And we would look at the Marriott downtown and say, that's the Poetry Hotel. So we started to imagine all kinds of things as we took the bus ride. And that's what it came to me, when I listened to this, that image of the bus and the poets in it. And so I wrote a poem because of this particular poem of his. So some of you who are contributors to the anthology, it would be great if you would share your story, but that's my story.
I just wanted to jump in with that wonderful description of your process of how you came about to your poem, because that's what we really were urging contributors to do, to look at Ferlinghetti and engage fully with him as a poet or an artist. We also encourage people to look at his artwork, which we have a few poems that people responded to, but just that interweaving of creativity with another poet's work, which some poets are reluctant to do. I think there's an idea that, oh no, whatever I write has to just come right from me and can't reference anyone else, and I shouldn't play with their lines or their words. And Ferlinghetti did that all the time. He has lines and words coming in from all sorts of places in his work. And so that's what we really were excited about, to see how people engaged with his work and came up with their own creation, as you did. So wonderful that you spoke about your process.
Thank you. Yes, it's, I to this day, I still listen to his poem, and, and I can imagine mine. It's great. Okay.
I wanted to say Andre Segovia is one of the most marvelous performers ever. For those who think about guitar, this is a guy, who performs, many recordings exist of him playing Spanish classical guitar, and it's so peaceful. It's so beautiful. It's, if
I
you,
wonder,
yeah.
if you go to YouTube and listen to that poem, you might be able to figure out who's behind it, or whoever had the original recording
Okay.
would be able to find out. And I would love to know.
Okay.
So I included some of his paintings here.
Right. So
like
he had a studio at Hunters Point for many decades. I think there were other studios before Hunters Point, but in recent decades, down at Hunters Point, where the artist colony has been, and there was a life drawing class that many people joined Lawrence in doing the life studies. He had studied visual art at Columbia, got a master's, did a thesis on John Ruskin and Turner. Turner being another populist, but like Lawrence, and so he was devoted to painting, and continued to keep it up. There were many exhibitions of his work, and I found, here you have somebody who's renowned in one realm and in another realm, and in another realm, and then another realm, and then in more realms. And he was really very accomplished, very admirable in how far he went into each of his pursuits. But the thing about the painting was that in this country, in this culture, what do you do? Oh, well, you're supposed to do that one thing, and you're not supposed to be like good at something else. So here you have a guy, he's famous poet and publisher, bookseller, etc. And then you have a guy who paints and paints with passion and love and a certain primitive quality. There's a lot to say about his work. There's so many sea colors. There's a certain darkness. There are often these figures that emerge. I love his painting, and I thought that it probably informed his poetry. They probably cross-fertilized. We know many poets and painters. Well, Virginia is one of them who combine those realms and they speak to each other.
And actually, the title of the book comes from a prose piece that he wrote saying that he really didn't want to be a poet, that he wanted to be an artist, a visual artist, but the poems kept coming to him. And in this prose piece, More Light, he says, I really just wanted to, I'm paraphrasing, but all I wanted to do was paint light on the walls of life.
Can you read that passage? Do you have that there?
I do have it here.
Yeah, so the title of the tribute anthology is Light on the Walls of Life.
So the passage, and this is on the Poetry Found, you can find it on the internet. It's also the opening to his collection of poems, How to Paint Sunlight. So this little excerpt from it starts off with a quote from Edward Hopper. All I wanted to do was paint sunlight on the side of a house, said Edward Hopper, or words to that effect. And there have been legions of poets and filmmakers obsessed with light. I would side with the irrational visionary romantic who says light came first and darkness but a fleeting shadow to be swept away with more light. More light, cried the great poet, dying. Poets and painters are the natural bearers of it, and all I ever wanted to do was paint light on the walls of life.
Beautiful.
And he also said while he kind of came of age as a painter in New York City amid all the abstract expressionists, that he could never really become an abstract expressionist because figures kept coming into his work. So he would start off trying to do an abstract expressionist piece, which he says is a misnomer actually, because there's nothing abstracted from anything real in abstract expressionist painters. But anyway, that's aside from the point. He said figures kept coming into his work. So he was not a successful abstract expressionist painter. And I think that ties back to what Bobby has been saying. He was such a humanist that his painting, people had to come into his painting because he wanted the best for humanity. He wanted light for everybody.
We have another painter poet here, Jane Radis. Jane, you want to talk about your process as being a painter and a poet?
Well, I started out, I came out here in '63 to go to the Art Institute. I was a painter, and it kind of, I've drawn since then, but I'm not a painter now. I started writing poetry in 1965, and I kind of like how I wrote like I talked. So I don't know about process. It's just like, I don't know. And the poem I have in this anthology is, I wrote it after I came back from a reading at City Lights, and coming back from the reading and walking through the city up to my apartment here. And it mentions Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and I had written it, and then I found out about the anthology, and it seemed like a really good fit.
Mm.
Anyway.
Yeah. Cool.
We're happy to have it.
And it's nice to see your face, to see faces to poets I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I put this up just because I like the quote, poetry is the shortest distance between two humans. And
I'm holding up the book that quote comes from,
oh,
and it's from What is Poetry? And on Lawrence's 100th, his last public appearance was from his window, and I think you had that in the still shot for the card that's title card for this
right.
broadcast.
Mm.
And he's at the window, and at the urging of poet painter Agneta Falk, a friend of Lawrence's, and then in coordination with Lawrence's family and support team, we organized a surprise sing from the male a cappella choir Conspiracy of Beards. And so the choir came to Lawrence's window as a surprise that morning. And we called up to his window, poetry is the shortest distance between two humans. And then we sang, you know, take me out to the ball game because that was an in joke. He loves baseball and has written baseball poems. And and then happy birthday. So he waved his scarf in appreciation, and we were beyond thrilled, beyond thrilled. Then the celebration continued all day into the street, various venues, city lights inside, city lights outside. Everybody came who could come.
This quote also is part of a contributor's contribution to the anthology. The quote was used in a citywide program that Anise Jacoby was part of, who's the contributor in our book. And it was, I forget what the year was when it happened, but I think it was part of the City of Poets campaign. And this was lit up, huge, huge, I don't know how big, but on the side of a building. So it would glow at night. And then we also saw pictures of it cast with light onto the sidewalks. So this quote was being used to try and really bring about more humanness in the city, a whole campaign that was going on with artists and activists and poets.
They should keep it on all the time.
I agree. Yes, it should just be shining
Just
all
be
the
there.
time.
Yes.
It should be shining on City Hall
Yes.
constantly.
Yes. Yes. This is the last slide. I put it there. Just to me, it's like his soul is being carried by this bird. And again, he's on the boat, so he could be, it's going somewhere.
His very last painting, if I understand correctly, is of himself in a boat as well. Well, the figure is suggestive of him. It's called Voyage 2 because he had a original Voyage 1. He was in the Navy, and he always loved the sea and boats, and he uses that symbolism a lot in his paintings of boats. And often there's a figure, if you look closely, there's a figure. The sea, the white part of the sea is a person. Do you see the woman's face?
Right here?
Yeah. And her hair flowing down. And it could be the Leda and the swan myth.
The swan is also a symbol of transcendence and floating, and again, this is time-honored spiritual motif. But I think we have to mention Lawrence's a couple of things in the arc of his life story. One is that in the Navy, of course, he was there immediately after the destruction, the bombing at Nagasaki, and it profoundly affected his pacifism and his political engagement thereafter. But that also was not his first traumatic experience. I mean, his early childhood was disrupted, to say the least, because his father had passed away during the pregnancy, and his mother was then institutionalized, and so he was sent to live with his aunt, and then later on he was in foster care with the employer of his family, of his aunt, and so he grew up having to feel like he was that little boy on his journey, um, in the vast ocean, in the vast ocean of life and the universe. Sometimes early trauma
Mm.
uh, um does liberate one in that sense to be universal in perspective. I think Lawrence may have, I hate to call it a benefit, but it does seem to have been a consequence of his early disruptive experiences, and that he grew up in an affluent foster home, very affluent, but not but but that wasn't him. That wasn't his family. So you get a view of the social divide that way, which I think also informed his work. So that image, that painting, and so many of his paintings tell that story.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Well, I hope that we can
Being
get a
here.
question or two if there's time,
But
Nancy.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
Is the anthology available yet?
No, we're hoping to tie up the loose ends, get it to the printer, and get it out there. And it's imminent. We're gonna have that. I know you're pointing at me like get it done. So yeah, it's coming, and of course we're going to have release events and let people know. So there's nothing ready to announce, and at this time of COVID, it might work out that we could actually have in-person events. So let's
Yeah,
see,
that would
let's
be
see.
great.
Yeah, but in the meantime, we're going to try to get that printed up and ready to go.
And
Well, it looks beautiful. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you, Nancy.
so, Ruby, maybe you can put up the last slide so that people can see Jambu Press. If you go to the website, I'm sure that it will be announced on the website, right?
It will.
Once
And
it is
there's an
available.
easier to remember website, which is jambupress.com. It goes to the same place. That's JAMBU press.com. And you know we we did a number of cover proofs, trying to figure out what to do. But it does turn out that Lawrence really loved his street, because it was the street of bootleggers and insurgents and underground personalities. So we thought that Lawrence would appreciate that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, so any more comments, questions? And we will conclude this.
Oh, can I just say
Okay.
that the best parts of this broadcast, the best parts were Lawrence's own words, and we could, if we ever do another hour, let's make sure that we read more and more poetry from Lawrence because it's so good, and there's nothing that I could say that would match Lawrence's own words.
Well, we can have a poetry reading when we just read his work. We can do that.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I think we should try and put on one of his plays too.
That would be cool. I would love to look at
Yeah, they're super avant-garde, and I some of them I was like, wow, what is going on? But it would just be fun to try and stage them.
Does it take a lot of people?
No, most of them just have like 2 or 3 or 4 characters, and you wouldn't have to have any set or anything. You just have masks or capes or things. Right. One takes place in a cave.
Oh,
so yeah.
That's very good. That's very easy to do.
It would be nice to have a reading actually from the anthology as well. I would like to hear other people's work. Do you have some art in the anthology, Virginia?
Yes, I have one piece after Ferlinghetti's Boat People, if you're familiar with that picture, with someone, which
Yeah.
someone wrote an ekphrastic poem about, and then I had an idea to riff on the painting with a COVID theme. So,
Virginia, now that I know you are
Great.
here, let's get together and do some stuff.
fabulous.
I love that play idea. I think it would be great to do. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Sherry. Ruby, Cynthia, Clara, thank you so much.